finance bank like Capital Small Finance Bank, Ujjivan Karnataka, Utkarsh UP, total 10 small finance banks. So CRR, SLR, Repo, FDI, same as Indian Private Bank, they are applicable. Condition for rural area 25% branches in case of small finance bank. Devised for unserved, underserved farmers, micro, small industries. Payment bank 6 at present Airtel, India Post, Fino, Paytm, Jio, NSDL. The CRSLR same as Indian private banks, but transmission and cost for SLR. 25% access points, remittance for migrant laborers, low income households, unorganized sector, small business. Then small finance banks offer basic banking service, accepting deposits and lending to unserved sections, including small business units, small and marginal farmers, right? Micro and small medium enterprise. The maximum loan size and investment limit exposure to single and group obligations cannot be more than 10% and 15% of its capital funds. 75% of credit is to priority sector. 50% of loan portfolio constitutes advances up to 25 lakh. They can undertake financial service like distribution of mutual fund units, insurance products, initial paid up voting equity share capital, net worth required to set up small finance bank. Currently it is 200 crores. 75% of the credit to priority sector. 50% of loan portfolio constitute advances up to 25 lakh. ठीक है. Regional rural banks. They are set up in 1976 by provision of RRB Act 1976. Voting power is Union State Sponsor Bank 51%. Ownership structure central government 50, state government how much? State government 15%. Then sponsor bank 35%. They are subjected to CRR, SLR norms, but RBI could prescribe separate norms. Priority sector lending 75%. Loan interest rate can't be more than prevailing lending rate. Operation restricted to few areas, can operate in urban areas too. Regulator RBI, but immediate regulator is NABARD. Okay. Then let's talk about payment banks. It is a differentiated bank that will undertake only certain restricted fund banking options. They include acceptance of deposit, payment and remittance services, but cannot lend money. They can accept deposits restricted to 2 lakh per customer. So payment bank केस में 2 lakh तक restriction है. They can accept the deposits, right? And they can pay customers. They cannot lend money to people. जो payment banks होते हैं वो लोगों को money lend नहीं कर सकते. They can offer financial products जैसे loan offer करते हैं payment bank, insurance देते हैं, mutual funds, pension funds, right? And partnering with other financial institutions. जो पेमेंट बैंक होते हैं दे कैन इशू एटीएम कार्ड्स इशू कर सकते हैं बट दे कैन नॉट इशू क्रेडिट कार्ड्स. पेमेंट बैंक्स कभी भी क्रेडिट कार्ड इशू नहीं कर सकते. 75% of the deposits generated by payment bank must be invested in government securities. जो 75% डिपॉजिट्स हैं वो गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज़ में जाना ज़रूरी है. एंड रिमेनिंग द मैक्सिमम ऑफ 25% एज डिपॉजिट्स की तरह रख लेते हैं इंक्लूडिंग द फिक्स डिपॉजिट्स. दे आर रिक्वायर्ड टू मेंटेन अ मिनिमम कैपिटल एडिक्वेसी रेशियो. कितना मेंटेन करना होता है? 15% ऑफ इट्स रिस्क वेटेड assets on a continuous basis subjected to any higher percentage as may be prescribed. जो मिनिमम पेड अप कैपिटल होता है पेमेंट बैंक्स का दैट इज़ 100 करोड्स. 100 करोड्स इज़ द मिनिमम पेड अप कैपिटल फॉर पेमेंट बैंक्स. Minimum initial contribution to paid up equity capital shall be at least 40%. Small finance banks offer basic banking services. They can issue credit card also and debit card also. They can have their own ATM. खुद का ATM हो सकता है स्मॉल फाइनेंस बैंक के केस में. The maximum loan size and the investment limit exposure can be more than 10% and 15% of its capital funds. 75% of the credit is to priority sector. 50% of loan portfolio constitute advances up to 25 lakhs. They can undertake financial service जैसे distribution of mutual fund units, insurance products, pension products, बट नॉट विदाउट प्रायर अप्रूवल फ्रॉम RBI. RBI का अप्रूवल ज़रूरी है. Initial paid up equity required to set up the small finance bank, currently it is 200 crores. ठीक है. Then let's talk about banking system. Part 2, Basel norms. It is global voluntary regulatory framework on bank capital adequacy stress testing and market liquidity risk. They are formulated by Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. Secretariat is located in Basel, Switzerland. Parameters, they comprise parameters like liquidity, asset ka quality, risk weight, management, earning, supervision and system control, altogether known as CAMELS. C for capital adequacy, M for management, E earnings, S supervision, then system control. Important terms related to Basel norms. Risk weighted assets. Assets of a bank weighted by their degree of credit risk. Capital to risk weighted asset ratio. It is important measure of safety and soundness of banks because it serves as a buffer. Tier 1 capital, ये बैंक का core capital होता है. It is used when it needs to absorb loss without ceasing its operations. It consists of equity share capital, reserves excluding revaluation reserve. Then additional tier 1 capital, they are perpetual bonds, बार बार repeat होते हैं, which carry a fixed coupon payable annually from past or present profit of the bank. Tier 2 capital is a supplementary capital of bank used to absorb the losses. अगर बैंक वाइंड अप कर रहा है assets को तो less reliable than first tier. It includes revaluation reserves, subordinate term debt, general provision and hybrid capital instruments. Leverage ratio क्या होता है बेसल 3 में? टायर 1 कैपिटल अपॉन एक्सपोजर मेजर. ठीक है. कैपिटल एडिक्वेसी का फॉर्मूला टायर 1 कैपिटल प्लस टायर 2 कैपिटल अपॉन रिस्क वेटेड एसेट्स. देन marginal cost of lending rate. They are linked to banks' cost of funds. They take 4 to 6 months to move after RBI rate cut. RBI rate cut not fully passed on to borrowers in case of MCLR. Reset annually for most banks. Annually इसको reset किया जाता है MCLR most banks के लिए. There are changes by 5 to 10 BPS का change होता है इसमें. हर महीने इसको रिवाइज किया जाता है. मार्जिनल कॉस्ट ऑफ लेंडिंग रेट. लो वॉलेटिलिटी बहुत कम होती है. रेपो लिंक्ड, एक होता है रेपो लिंक्ड लोन. दे आर लिंक्ड टू RBI's लेंडिंग रेट. दे रिस्पॉन्ड इमीजिएटली टू RBI रेट कट. रेट कट आर ऑटोमेटिकली पास्ड ऑन. हर 3 महीने में रीसेट किया जाता है. MCLR को एनुअली रीसेट किया जाता है. रेपो लिंक लोन को हर 3 महीने में रीसेट किया जाता है. यूजुअली चेंजेस 25 BPS. रिव्यू किया जाता है बाय मंथली. हायर वॉलेटिलिटी होती है इन केस ऑफ रेपो लिंक लोन. ठीक है. देन लीड बैंक स्कीम, इट इज़ इंट्रोड्यूस टूवर्ड्स एंड ऑफ 1969. सो ये एनवाइसेज करती है असाइनमेंट ऑफ लीड रोल्स टू इंडिविजुअल बैंक्स. डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स में लीड बैंक स्कीम अप्लाई होती है. ऑल द डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स इन द कंट्री हैव बीन अलॉटेड वेरियस बैंक्स अलॉट किए जाते हैं जो लीडर की तरह एक्ट करते हैं. कोऑर्डिनेटिंग एफर्ट्स ऑफ ऑल क्रेडिट इंस्टीट्यूशन. Priority sector lending, there are certificates also, they are short term certificates. Then external benchmark lending rate, it replaced the MCLR system. These are the lending rate set by banks based on external benchmark जैसे repo rate, 91 days treasury bills, right? Capital conservation buffer क्या होता है? It ensures that banks maintain cushion of capital which can be used to absorb losses during financial and economic stress. Counter cyclical capital buffer ये increase करता है capital requirements को in good times and decrease करता है in bad times. Liquidity coverage ratio, it refers to proportion of highly liquid assets held by financial institutions to ensure their ongoing ability to meet short-term obligation. नेट स्टेबल फंडिंग रिक्वायरमेंट, ये अमाउंट है अवेलेबल स्टेबल फंडिंग का इन रिलेशन टू अमाउंट ऑफ रिक्वायर्ड स्टेबल फंडिंग. बेसल 1 बेसल कैपिटल अकॉर्ड साइन किया गया था 1988 में. बेसल 2 2004, बेसल 3 2010. Liquidity coverage ratio. It requires banks to hold an amount of high quality liquid assets that are enough to fund cash outflow for 30 days. Net stable funding requirement. Basel III require bank to hold enough stable funding to cover the duration of their long term assets. LCR assess करता है शॉर्ट टर्म 30 डे रेजिलियंस. ये पिलर्स बने हुए हैं. पिलर्स 1 में मिनिमम कैपिटल रिक्वायरमेंट, पिलर 2 सुपरवाइजरी रिव्यू प्रोसेस, पिलर 3 डिस्क्लोजर एंड मार्केट डिसिप्लिन. बेसल 3 में एनहेंस्ड मिनिमम कैपिटल एंड लिक्विडिटी रिक्वायरमेंट्स, पिलर 2 एनहेंस्ड सुपरवाइजरी रिव्यू प्रोसेस, पिलर 3 एनहेंस्ड रिस्क डिस्क्लोजर. ये सब बैंकिंग की चीज़ें नॉर्मल लाइफ में भी बहुत यूज़फुल होती है, इसलिए इसके बारे में जानकारी होना ज़रूरी है. कैपिटल कंजर्वेशन बफर रिक्वायरमेंट बाय बेसल 3 2.5%, CET1 4.5%. ठीक है. टू बिग टू फेल, जो डोमेस्टिक सिस्टमेटिकली इंपॉर्टेंट बैंक्स होते हैं उनको 5 ग्रेड में क्लासीफाई करते हैं. 5 ग्रेड्स मतलब बकेट्स भी बोलते हैं उनको. RBI अनाउंस करता है लिस्ट एवरी अगस्त स्टार्टिंग दिस ईयर. Banks will have to fulfill certain capital requirements. Banks, they must meet the extra norms in 3 years by April 1, 2019. Common equity tier 1 capital usually comprise करता है बैंक का equity capital, retained earnings and share premium. ठीक है. So let's meet in the next session. That's it for today.